Hi, it's Little Lisa. I'm going to make a Polish vegetable soup with torn dumplings. Now, this recipe came out of a cookbook called Healthy Jewish Cooking by Stephen Rocklin, and it's a really great cookbook. And I used to make things out of it all the time, but we're now gluten-free, and some of my kids are dairy-free, so I've kind of adapted it for what we need. But I thought I'd show you how I make it. So it calls for leeks, and I thought I'd show you in case you're not familiar with a leek. It's in the onion family. It grows like this, the root and the top, and you eat basically the light green and the green part. These parts, I mean, it's not that like they're not edible, they're just really tough. So they grow in the dirt, like all the way up to like here is in dirt. So they get really dirty because they grow like in layers. So what I'm going to do is show you how I clean it. So I'm going to cut off the root end, cut off to the point that I want to use where the dark green starts. Then I'm going to, for this purpose, cut it in half and show you how much dirt's in there and how I rinse all the layers, and then I'll slice it up. So I'm just going to cut off the root end and cut off where the dark green starts. And this part I'm just going to put in my garbage bowl for my compost pile. Because even though it's winter here in Michigan, we still do compost. So if you can see in there, there's a whole bunch of dirt in all the rings. So we need to get all that dirt out because you don't want gritty, dirty soup. So I slice it in half, and you can see there's like a ton of dirt in there. So we're just going to rinse them really well in between each layer. I basically peel the layers kind of apart and use my hands to get all that dirt out of there. And if there's some parts where the dirt won't like come off of the leek, I'll just cut that out. But I think it's pretty good. And I do the other side just to make sure that there's no dirt. And I'm just going to shake the water out and do this side. If for some reason you have a recipe where you need to not cut it in half, then my suggestion would be to cut the rings and then get a bowl of water and swish them around in there really well till all the dirt's out, if you for some reason need it in like full circles. Now I'm just going to slice it real thinly here. So I'm just going to trim this all up. So this recipe calls for one large leek, and the package of the leeks I got were two in a package, like rubber banded together. And they were kind of smallish leeks. So I'm doing basically like 1.5 times of the soup because I figured two small ones is equal to about 1.5 large ones. So I already prepped the other one. So I have all my veggies prepped here, and now we're going to go and I'll show you how I put the soup together. So hang on just a second. Okay, so here's how I'm going to put this together. Um, so this recipe is pretty easy because everything pretty much goes in the pot, all the vegetables, and cooks for a little bit before you do the other stuff. So it gives you kind of time to do everything. I did cut these potatoes up earlier, so they're getting a little bit brown, but that's okay. So basically, you have for a single recipe, you would have a large leek and 2 stalks of chopped celery. So I've got celery and some leek here. I'm doing like basically 1.5 times this. And then the other leek, and it just all goes in the pot. And then a small onion, so this is like 1.5 small onions. And then 2 carrots, so this is like 4 carrots, or 3 carrots actually. It was one small and 2 really big ones. And then I have a pound of potatoes, so I have like 1.5 pounds of just chunked up potatoes. And then I have the garlic. So it calls for 3 cloves of garlic. I've got 5, but a couple of them are really large from our garden. So I'm just going to squeeze that in here. Got this on medium high. Okay. All right, I need to look at the recipe because I can't always remember the exact proportions of certain things. So I need to put some of the dill. So I have chopped up fresh dill, and it calls for like 3 tablespoons to go in now. So I'm just going to do like that much now. And the rest you add in after. And then some butter. Now, to make this a completely dairy-free, which I have done in the past, just put some olive oil or avocado oil or whatever oil you like in here, or even a butter substitute that you like. My kids can have butter, they just can't have like milk because they're casein intolerant. So I'm just going to use butter because that's fine with them. So I've got a tablespoon and a half here. Oh, it calls for 2, never mind, it calls for 2 tablespoons of butter, so I need 3. Okay, so I got to do a little bit more. So you put the butter in. Okay. And then you put water. Okay, so it calls for 10 cups of water, so I'm going to do 15 cups. I've got 8 cups in here. It's cold water, cold filtered water. I just have it in the tea kettle because it was easy to pour out of. And then my husband will go fill me some more water. I'm going to stir this real quick. You want to bring it up to a boil and then let it simmer. So I'm not sure if you can see in the pot, but it's just all the veggies, the dill, and the butter with the water. And we'll put more water, and then we'll let it cook. While it's cooking, we'll prep the other ingredients and the dough for the dumplings. This is called Polish vegetable soup with torn dumplings. So you basically just make the dumplings and tear them into the broth, the veggie broth soup, and let it cook, and it is so delicious. I made it long before we were gluten-free, as the recipe called, and as time went on, I've just kind of changed it a bit, and it's still delicious. Maybe not quite as authentic, but delicious. I'm going to turn this up to high to let it boil, and then I'll turn it down to medium and let it simmer. 7 more cups. Okay, that should be good. Okay, so we're just going to let this come to a boil and then turn it down to simmer, and then it needs to simmer for 10 minutes before we add the next ingredient. So I'll be back. Okay, so our vegetables and water and dill and butter came to a boil, and then I turned it down to medium, and it's been boiling for like 10 minutes. So now we're going to do the next step, which is quick oats. So these are organic, certified gluten-free quick oats. I don't always have quick oats. I happen to get some recently, so I'm using them. The recipe does call for quick oats, but you could just use regular oats, and you can either whiz them in a blender to kind of break them up into smaller pieces like this, or just put them in there. I've done it. I just let them cook longer if I do that. Instead of the 10 to 15 minutes it calls for, I go more like 20 to half hour. But I'm using quick oats today. So you put 2 tablespoons per batch of soup. So I have 3 tablespoons for my batch and a half here. And then you add salt and pepper. So this is quite a bit of stock. So I'm going to add like a teaspoon of, this is a 1/4 teaspoon, so I'm going to add 4 of these because you want it well seasoned. Okay, and I'm going to add a bunch of pepper. Okay, so then I'm just going to stir that in, and then you let it keep boiling for about another 10 to 15 minutes. I'll probably let it go 15 minutes. And while that is going, I'm going to show you how I make the dough. So the dough is pretty simple. I just need to grab a little bit of flour for my bench. So I'm going to put, here, I got a little water on here, steam from the Just wipe that off. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of flour. This is just my all-purpose gluten-free flour blend. Okay, so you start out with a cup, half a cup per batch. So I'm doubling the dumpling part, even though I only 1.5 times, just because it calls for 1 egg white, and I did not want to try and figure out 1.5 egg whites. So I'm doing 2 egg whites. So I'm doing 1 whole cup of flour. So it would be half a cup of flour, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So half a cup of flour, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 egg white, and 2 tablespoons of cold water. Um, However, I put a little bit of xanthan gum because my all-purpose blend does not have it in there, and it helps just hold the structure so it doesn't fall apart when you're boiling the dumplings. So I have double. So I have a cup of flour, a half a teaspoon of salt, and I put about just scant half a teaspoon of xanthan gum, and I'm going to mix in the egg whites. I just have 2 egg whites. And these eggs, I guess they'd be considered like large eggs because we get them from a farm. So they're pasture eggs, so they don't really excuse me. Um, they don't really grade the eggs like you do get at the grocery store, but I'd say they're probably large. Okay, now I'm going to need the water. I just kind of want to get that mixed up in there. So I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons. Actually, let me double check. Okay, yeah, so it's 1 tablespoon. So per half cup of flour, it's 1 tablespoon. So I only need 2 tablespoons, not 4. Now, because this is gluten-free flour, it absorbs moisture more, especially with the xanthan gum. So I may very well have to add more flour. That's kind of the chemistry of cooking gluten-free. So we're going to kind of see how it goes. And this isn't quite all moist, so I'm going to do it with my hand. Oh, I need to pull up my sleeve. Yeah, that should be good. So I had to add, instead of 2 tablespoons, I had to add 3. So that would be like a tablespoon and a half per half a cup of flour. But it really depends, like it's winter here, so it's drier in my house. And it really depends on the humidity and your flour and what flour you're using. So just kind of play it by ear. But this is looking pretty good. Now, I don't want too much flour on my board where I'm going to roll this out. So I'm going to get all this off of here. Spread this over here. If I need it, I can pull it in. And then I'm going to kind of knead this a little bit because it needs to come together. I don't think it needs more water, but it just needs to be mixed up better. I do need a little water. I can dribble it on there. All right, let's see how this works. I'm making a mess. Probably shouldn't have worn a sweatshirt with long sleeves while I was making this, but it's cold because it's winter. It's like 12 degrees here or something ridiculous. All right, this does need a tad bit more water. I'm just going to put a little bit of water on my hand and dribble it on. And this is a silicone mat, so it's kind of doesn't tend to stick as bad as like a counter or something would. So I don't need quite as much flour on my bench. But this is starting to hold together better. Now, I like to let it sit for a few minutes because it's gluten-free. That helps it absorb the liquid, and I'll know if I need more. Let me add just a dribble more. Yeah, there we go. You don't really want it sticky, but you want it to hold together. You're not really kneading it to develop the gluten. You're just kneading it to get it all smooth and mixed together. Yeah, that's exactly what I want there, where it's not really too sticky. Tacky, but not sticky. Okay. Now, I'm just going to leave this here. I'm going to cover it with a little bit of plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out, and I'm going to wait until it's time to add these. I do find that by switching it to gluten-free, they take a little longer to cook. So after I add the dumplings, I do let them cook a little bit longer. So I'll probably only go 10 minutes to letting that boil and then add them and let them cook with the last part of the cooking time for the vegetables. Okay, so we're just going to leave it in this log and I'm going to cover it and I will be back. Okay, so this has been boiling since we put the oatmeal in for approximately 10 minutes. So I'm going to start the dumplings and get them in there. It says to cook them for 10 minutes, but with the gluten-free, I feel like it needs like at least probably closer to 20. So we're going to do that. So anyways, I broke this into 4 chunks and I'm just going to kind of roll it out. And it doesn't roll great without breaking, so you just have to kind of, if you think it's too dry and you want a little water, like it's not really sticking together here. I don't know. I think it dried out a tad bit, even though I covered it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're just gonna roll it, and it does kind of not want to really roll out great. So if you have to do like it tears, just do smaller pieces. But you want it about a pencil thickness. Just kind of squeeze it and roll it and squeeze it and roll it, and it does fall apart. It's just not even with the xanthan gum. Sometimes I add the whole egg because the egg yolk seems to give the dough a little bit better texture for the gluten-free. But I don't always, and I didn't today. I probably should have. Okay, so that's about what you want it to look like, about a thick pencil. So I usually just start rolling out a segment and putting it in. Um, I don't have to have them all rolled out to like start putting them in the soup. Here, this is getting a little bit sticky, but I'm going to do these 3 and then we'll go from there. Okay, so this is, once you've got them all rolled out or rolled out a few of them and then want to start, I just take a chunk of it and I just break it off. You just tear off little pieces, like maybe a pea size, like about like this. It doesn't really matter. It's literally however you want to do it, but I just kind of do little chunks. And then I go through all my little logs here, and if they're a little too thick, I just kind of thin them out and tear them off. And you just let them pop in there, and they'll just cook like a little dumpling, and they'll float to the top as they puff up. And I want to make sure they're cooked through, so I let them cook longer because I feel like the gluten-free dough takes a little longer to get soft in the middle. So you just tear them in there, and they'll start coming up to the top. Just be careful you don't let it splash and burn you. So if you need to turn it down while you do it and then turn it back up, you can. Okay, so I'm going to finish off the rest of this dough and get the dumplings in here just like this, and then we'll let it cook, and then I'll come back and show you how you finish the soup. Okay, so our all of our dumplings were put into the soup, and it cooked for about, I'd say, 20 minutes altogether. And so we're going to continue to the next step, basically pretty much the last step. Um, so if you can see in the pot, the noodles or the dumplings have floated to the top. And if you notice, the broth is a little bit thick, like it's not just watery. That's the oatmeal and a combination of the starch from the dumplings cooking in there. So it kind of gives it a little bit of body, which is nice. Okay, so now the last step is for a 1 batch of this, you would add half a cup of sour cream. Since my kids can't have that kind of dairy, I have started using, and you don't taste the coconut at all. Although if you can't have coconut, you have to do something different. But I use full fat coconut milk mixed with a little bit of vinegar. I put the vinegar in and just kind of let it sit a little. It gives it that tang that you get from a sour cream, and it's not quite the same thickness, but once it melts in there, you don't know the difference. It just gives it that milky, creamy mouth feel with a little hint of sourness from the vinegar. So I just stir that in, gives it a nice little creamy color. So I put 3/4 of a cup in for a batch and a half. And then you add the remainder of your dill. You want to kind of just let this cook for maybe 5 minutes. And then you just taste it for salt and pepper and add your seasoning. So I'm just going to taste it now and then let it simmer. So then you can just serve it. And if you have more dill, you could sprinkle some dill on top when you serve it, make it really pretty. It's very flavorful. You want it nicely seasoned. You want it nicely salted and nicely peppered. So you definitely want to taste it and make sure. I'm just going to taste some of the broth. Oh, it's hot. Whoa, that's way hot. All right, it does need a little bit more salt and pepper. So I'm just going to sprinkle some in there, probably like half a teaspoon. I like pepper, so to taste is obviously up to you. Just stir that in. I find that the flavors in the soup really meld together and it's even super delicious the next day. All right, so it just needs to cook for a couple minutes and then it's ready to serve. So that's all there is to it. And it's a nice, luscious vegetable soup. That pepper got me. I stirred it right into my nose. But it's delicious soup. And you could, if you can have sour cream, you can use that, and then you could put a dollop on your bowl as well. It's just a nice, warm, comforting, delicious soup, and it's pretty inexpensive to make. Most of the ingredients, except maybe the leek, you have on hand, and it's just easy to throw together, and my kids love it. So anyway, enjoy. Uh, have a safe winter if it's cold where you are. It's snowing here in Michigan, and goodbye and good luck.